President Biden took the oath of office 1 year ago today amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. In addition to pandemic recovery, he's attempted to address economic stability and voting rights, but not always successfully. An Associated Press poll finds about 56% of people say they disapprove of how Biden has handled his first year in office, while 43% say they do approve. Joining us now with more are James Taylor, president of the Heartland Institute, Xavier Ramey, CEO of Justice Informed, Susan Stokes, professor and director of the Chicago Center on Democracy at the University of Chicago, and Jaime Dominguez, political science professor at Northwestern University. Welcome back to Chicago Tonight, everyone. So, Xavier Ramey, let's start with you, please. How would you assess the president on his first year?
Thanks so much, Brandis. Great to be here with you. I think that President Biden, given what he promised in the beginning, but more than that, what he ran on in terms of bringing together a very, very divided and contentiously brought together country. If we remember the political climate coming into his election, the promises he made specifically around criminal justice reform, around social programs, around funding for certain types of employment programs, these sorts of things on the social side. I'm very much not impressed with his record coming in as it relates to how he's been able to manage some of the more emergent challenges. For instance, how COVID has evolved throughout his presidency, the elasticity of these surges, and being able to keep up with those. I think that he's done as best as probably could, and there's quite a bit more to be done. As it relates to the economy, which I think a lot of people are focused on right now, given that inflation is at 7%, where it was 1.5% this time last year. As the economy, I think that's a bit more emergent. That's often a presidential focus. And I think that given where prices are, people are very upset with how he's managing it. But I would also say that that's something that the Federal Reserve is set up as an autonomous body to be more engaged in. However, his responsibility around business policy, I think, has also been a bit lacking as it relates to supporting small businesses and such.
And Susan Stokes, coming to you next. Is this just a terrible time for anyone to be president? How would you rate the president's last year?
Well, thank you so much for the invitation. I think it's I think the challenges are enormous. I think that the Biden administration, the team sort of made a decision coming in that they were going to try to solve some, the major crises of the pandemic and the economy, and sort of put off some other issues, that they would buy themselves time and hopefully, buy themselves a bigger margin of in the 22 midterm elections by solving those problems. And I think they were in good faith. I think the president was speaking in good faith when he made other promises that, that as Javier was pointing out, have been disappointing. The plan was, get a bigger margin in Congress, win some more sort of room for maneuver by solving these big problems, and then attend to some other things like racial justice, like criminal justice, like immigration, and so on. The problem is they've had some, they've had some real problems, structural problems, and some bad judgments, some mistakes. So they've lost that room for maneuver.
So yesterday, we all know that we saw the push for voting rights reform fail in the Senate. Here's a quick clip from yesterday's speech.
No matter how hard they make it for minorities to vote, I think you're going to see them willing to stand in line and defy the attempt to keep them from being able to vote. I think you're going to see the people we're trying to keep from being able to show up, showing up and making the sacrifice it needs to be made in order to change the law back to what it should be.
Jaime Dominguez, bringing you in. What's your reaction to yesterday's vote?
Yeah, I'm sure it's disappointing, but I wouldn't say it's a partisan issue. I mean, I think it's more of a democratic issue. The fact that the right to protect the vote is sacred. I think it's unfortunate, though, that they couldn't get the filibuster rules changed in order to get that legislation passed. I think it was important for President Biden to speak on that issue, particularly given that the African American vote is, I would argue, largely responsible for putting him in office. James Clyburn and his endorsement basically changed the trajectory of his campaign. And so to him, knowing that it probably wasn't going to get passed, he nevertheless, I think, wanted to show emotion, and he wanted to show that he's still committed to this in the long term. So I think it was important for him to just let his base know, but also Americans know that this issue of the vote is not a Republican or Democratic issue, but it's actually an American issue that we need to work with together on both sides of the aisle.
James Taylor, coming to you, similar question. Do you think the president could have acted differently to receive better results from both parties? Or, was this a non-starter, particularly for the Republican Party?
Well, thank you for having me on, Brandis. And yes, I think that Joe Biden can and should be doing more to find common ground on a whole variety of issues. He ran on being a unifier and a uniter. Regarding the particular topic of voting, we have to understand the proper context. According to the federal government, there are 230,000 polling places in this country. That is 46,000 per state, and that is one for every 280 voters. So it's not very difficult to vote. It's easier to go vote than it is to go get a COVID vaccine or a COVID test, which the Biden administration tells us both are easy to do and that we must do. But the thing is this, it should be easy to vote and it should be hard to cheat. And you have two parties and two perspectives that are saying, okay, well, we have to make it easier to vote. And the other side, we have to make it harder to cheat. You really have to accomplish both in any meaningful legislation. And if you're not doing both, or if you are advancing one at the cost of the other, then you're just going to have a further divide. I think there are solutions. I think it should be that there should be options available that allow our system to be easier to vote, but also hard to cheat. You cannot have a system where everyone can vote, but nevertheless, a large number of those votes are fraudulent, or else we have a banana republic.
Now, overall, he's had several stalled initiatives on his agenda, obviously Build Back Better being one of them, and he said yesterday that he would be open to the initiatives there being broken up into pieces to get through Congress. Susan, would you say he's been effective in creating unity between the parties?
I think the Republicans have been very effective in trying to block everything he does. So I'm going to respectfully disagree with James and say, look, there's, that's been the mission of Mitch McConnell and the Republicans, and the Republican Party is dead set on just being the party of no against everything that the Democrats are trying to do, whether they disagree or don't really disagree that much. So, and by the way, the problem we have in our democracy compared to every other democracy, certainly every advanced system, is very low voter participation because we make it so difficult for people to vote. There's no widespread fraud in our country. That every study, every academic study, every serious appraisal of the elections after 2020 has made clear that there is no widespread fraud in our system.
Now, earlier today, we spoke with White House Deputy Communications Director Kate Berner and asked how the administration feels this first year has gone. Here she is.
It helped schools across the country reopen. It helped us fund a vaccination campaign. Today, more than 200 million Americans are vaccinated. In the last, in this surge of Omicron, those are Americans who were protected against severe illness and hospitalization and death. That's critically important. They have a very different life right now than they did a year ago. We've created 6.4 million jobs. It's the most jobs created in any one single year in history.
Xavier Ramey, coming back to you, how would you say the Biden administration has handled COVID? Are they doing enough?
I think that when I think about the Biden administration in comparison to the Trump administration, when it comes to the COVID response, we were still learning in 2020 and early 2021. But at this point, we're 2 years into this pandemic, and the response that we're seeing from the federal government, whether it be President Biden saying that, COVID response is not a federal issue, it's a state issue, and it should be a state response. However, the states obviously are very, very different in their understanding of non-politicization of a respiratory pandemic. And so I do believe that there needs to be a federal response, and I've not seen that our president has taken that as seriously as it's needed to be. When we look at the 400 million masks that were just mandated by the federal government to go out, that is something that should have happened in his first week in office. When we think about the precautions for people with disabilities and how they could be more powerfully included in the COVID response, whether it be informing the federal government or otherwise, we've not seen it. And so I think there's quite a bit more. However, I will also acknowledge the fractured nature of our public health system and the politicization of COVID.
Absolutely. Before we run out of time, I want to get James Taylor in here. Same question to you. How would you say the Biden administration has handled the pandemic?
Well, the Biden administration is caught in a position where it politicized COVID back before the last election. We had COVID deaths that basically were going to happen. And whether it's President Trump or President Biden, the rate of COVID has been about the same. The death rates have been about the same. In the states that have had more onerous mask requirements, social distancing requirements, economic shutdowns, the rate of cases and deaths is about the same. The pandemic is very difficult to deal with. And unfortunately, that's what we're stuck with. It's a great tragedy. But if you're going to politicize it and say the reason why we had a pandemic was because of Donald Trump's incompetence, you better fix it yourself, or else now it's on you. And right now it's on Joe Biden.
Okay, that is where we'll have to leave it. My thanks to all four of you. I'm sorry we're out of time. Xavier Ramey, James Taylor, Susan Stokes, and Jaime Dominguez.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.